Just a word of caution, this podcast does contain material related to sexual assault, which could be upsetting to some listeners. Please make sure you're emotionally resourced and seek help from a trauma specialist or medical professional if you need it.
A conditional discharge or a peace bond does nothing to stop the violence. It does nothing to say to the perpetrator that society abhors what you did and we will hold you accountable.
Hi, and welcome to Slut or Nut, the podcast.
Tell it to me straight. Don't leave out a word. Don't leave out anything you think I should have heard.
I'm Kelly Shoker, and I'm the director of Slut or Nut, The Diary of a Rape Trial, which is a feature-length documentary film exploring what it is like to report rape and following activist Mandi as she fights to change how victims of sexual assault are treated by the criminal justice system. You can also find the show notes related to this episode on our site and more episodes of Slut or Nut, the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and on our website at www.slutornut.ca. And if you'd like to share your own story of sexual assault, gender-based violence, or your expertise on the legal system or trauma related to sexual assault, and you'd like to be a guest on our podcast, please email us at slutornutthemovie@gmail.com. So for today's episode, we had a conversation with Nneka Macgregor, the director of an organization called Women at the Center. And you can also catch Nneka Macgregor in Slut or Nut, The Diary of a Rape Trial. She's one of the women we feature in the film and talk to throughout the trial that the documentary shows. So let's hear from Nneka.
My name is Nneka Macgregor, and I am the co-founder and executive director of the organization. We're called Women's Center for Social Justice, but we are better known as Women at the Center. And it's a survivor-led organization. It's created by and for women survivors of gendered violence. And I was in a relationship for 19 years. And as a result of everything that I went through, finally ended up in 2002 separating from my ex-husband. Because I had children, I was sort of navigating the family courts. Because he'd been arrested and charged with assault, we were also navigating the criminal courts. Because we owned a company together, we were navigating the civil courts. And because the final assault had been witnessed by our children, we had, police came, so we had criminal justice engagement. We had child welfare because the children witnessed. We had, dealing with judges in family courts, a judge in criminal courts. And it was just the way all of these systems were not talking to each other, number one. And when they appeared to talk to each other, it wasn't anything beneficial to me or my children. It seemed to be sort of perpetrator friendly. And that made me angry. And I needed a way, an outlet for my anger that was constructive. So the organization is, as I said, it's by and for women survivors. And the idea is to have women survivors actually, at the tables where policies are being created, programs are being developed and evaluated, and to have the survivors being recognized as the true experts to the issues that are being discussed. Because the problems that I've seen over the years is that the voices of the survivors are relegated to the background, and we are painted as these broken, inconsequential women almost. And it's similar to the whole process of the criminal courts where you're just a witness. Even though this is what happened to you, you should be the primal central figure, but you're an incidental, you're just a witness to the occurrence. And I thought, no, we are experts to the issues, and we needed to create a mechanism by which our expertise was recognized and respected. And what we're trying to do is to really move away from his word against hers, because we know in a lot of these sexual assault cases, there's no third party, there's nobody else that was witness to it, it's just him and her. So, best case scenario, go back to this ideal woman, this wonderful officer, this wonderful police officer, and the evidence is there. Then you go to, well, what offense under the criminal code is he going to be charged with? They don't go for the serious assaults because it's difficult to prosecute, it's difficult to win. So that Crown sometimes will go for the lesser assault because it is easier to prosecute. So you get to the point of prosecution, women don't have access to legal representation because the Crown, and this is something that a lot of people don't know, the Crown is not her lawyer. The Crown is there for the state. And the woman is there, as I said before, not as a party really to the proceedings. She is a witness. She is just a witness. And so a lot of things are done that is about her, but without her, which we find really, really troublesome. So there are all these procedural what-ifs that tends to be blockades, right? They're barriers to a successful disclosure, arrest, prosecution, and conviction. And then let's say that we actually do get to the point where he's prosecuted and you have a judge that's there and he's convicted. The likelihood of these men receiving a serious sentence that is commensurate to the crime is negligible. The most frequently used resolution that we found was a conditional discharge. And next to that was a peace bond. Keep the peace. Don't go within 400 meters of her school or her work. Don't own a firearm. That doesn't do anything because oftentimes they breach, the men will breach. They will go 350 meters from her work or school. They will criminally harass. They'll call her. They'll keep on doing because a conditional discharge or a peace bond does nothing to stop the violence. It does nothing to say to the perpetrator that society abhors what you did and we will hold you accountable. Conditional discharge, peace bond is not an accountability mechanism at all. It isn't. And having had the courage to come forward and go through all of this, only to see your perpetrator then get a conditional discharge, it is disillusioning, it's disheartening. And then it persuades men to continue to do because there's no accountability. If I raped and I was not charged, if I was charged, I wasn't convicted, I'll go and do it again. Where's the incentive not to? And what all of that does, what it leads to, is women sitting back and wondering, why on earth did I go through all of this in the first place? Because the way that women are treated on the stand and the way that they are eviscerated by defense counsel. And I understand it, I really do, because they're there to vigorously defend their client. But to eviscerate women and to bring up issues that are really irrelevant. Defense counsel will often ask, for example, her counseling, mental health records, right? If she had a counselor, which you can understand why, if a woman does seek counseling, it's to deal with a trauma. And if Buddy had not done what he did, she wouldn't need counseling, right? But they use it as a way to impugn her mental capacity, right? And to imply that she was somehow not credible because she's not mentally stable, right? Then they look at this whole issue of a woman's past sexual history. If I had sex with Jack and I consented on Monday, it doesn't mean that on Wednesday that I consented. So for anybody to then go and say to me, well, you had sex with him on Monday, therefore every other sexual encounter that you have with him is justified, that is the most banal and unevolved logic, right? If a woman consents on day 1 and doesn't consent on day 2, we are talking about day 2. We're talking about that particular instance. And if I don't consent on that second day, then him going ahead, that is rape. And this is one of those areas that actually it becomes even more complicated when we talk about it in the context of intimate partner relationships, much less acquaintance violence. More women are sexually assaulted by somebody that they know than by a stranger. We know this as a fact because police rates of reporting reflects this. Stats Canada reflects this. The fact that I'm your spouse does not give you the right to. The fact that we are dating does not give you the right to. And a woman has a right to say no. That's what the law says. We have a right to autonomy of our bodies, and we have a right to pick who and when and how long. It isn't his choice, it is our choice. And when a man transgresses, it goes over that, he needs to be held accountable. So I'm still not sure what the resolution is. I am still not sure, right? I don't know how many times we've heard of our members whose exes, those who were convicted and did do time, he then comes out and escalates because prison didn't do anything to rehabilitate him.
Besides the systemic barriers that you've discussed to wanting to get involved in this process and the lack of proper punishment for the perpetrators, what are some other barriers that you see that keep women from reporting the crimes?
Again, that is so, it's complex and yet not. Race comes into it. Mental health comes into it. Access to justice, access to resources. Can you afford a lawyer comes into it. So poverty is an issue. So that's just for the woman, right? There are lots of variables on whether she goes forward, and if she goes forward, how she's likely to be perceived and believed. Then there's another variable of which police officers actually show up at the scene. So even though police have specialized training on sexual violence, not all of them have the same analysis. So unfortunately, we hear so often about women who go and report, which is hard enough as it is, but you go and report, and the officer who is taking your report is dismissive, doesn't believe you, will blame you, right? Will try and shame you and make you feel as if there was something that you did wrong. And then the reality is, I didn't break the law. This guy did, right? There are women who don't necessarily want the relationship to end, right? So there are, I don't know how many, if we're looking at statistically, but I know in our own membership that there are women who did not want the relationship to end. They just wanted the violence to end. And calling the police, the act of picking up the phone and calling the police is such a huge decision, because it then gets taken out of your hands, right? So a lot of women, that becomes a barrier. I don't want to call the police because I don't want him arrested. I don't want him charged. You know, we have kids together. I still love him. There's a variety of reasons why women don't. And then there are women, and again, I don't know statistically, but I know that it's high enough. There are women for whom safety, they are afraid. Because if I do report, the consequences, the repercussions, he is going to come after me. These men, and we're talking about a particular kind of guy, these men capitalize on this. They know their partners, they know the weaknesses, and they also know that the system is not responsive, right, to women's violence. So they escalate. I call it incremental liberties. They do a little bit, there are no consequences. They do a little bit more, there are no consequences. They do a little bit more, and it just escalates until it gets to the point where she is murdered. And then everybody sits back and says, oh my goodness, he was such a nice guy. He was so quiet. We never, yes, you did. We knew. So when a woman comes to me and says, I've been assaulted, what do you think I should do? I always turn it back to them. And in turning it back to them, I try and explain to them what the process looks like, how challenging it's going to be, how, actually, quite upfront, is that there is no shame in not reporting, because we all have to do what we have to do to keep ourselves, functioning. But that she should become educated about the process, because knowledge is power. It's as simple as that. The more you know, the more you are back in control of your decisions. And when women control their decisions, I've seen that it precipitates a healing a lot faster. So we provide as much information as possible. For women who don't want to formally report, the most useful thing they can do for themselves is start documenting. Start recording. And I'm not talking about journaling, which has its benefits. I am talking about documenting. So on January the 27th, 2016, he broke into my house, and take pictures. Start keeping that type of time-logged, detailed record. Whether you are separated or you are living together, these are invaluable evidence that you're gathering. Because also what happens is that with the passage of time, you forget. But when you've accumulated this list of instances, it really helps to build a case eventually, if you ever do decide. It gives women a sense of ownership over their lives again, because you're taking control. Even though you might feel that you're losing control when this stuff happens, by the process of documenting, you're in control of the narrative, right? You're controlling what is unfolding. And what we tend to do is that we don't. If we journal, it's more about how I'm feeling. He said this to me and I felt, no, you need to start being a little bit of a badass and protect yourself. Send it off to a best friend so that it's not something that you keep in the house where he can access. You send it off somewhere that they can, somebody can keep it safe. I also think that women should find somebody that you tell, because a lot of the times the defense will say, well, you never told anybody. How come this is the first time? Tell someone. Find somebody that you trust and tell. Whether the person that you've told believes you or not doesn't make your telling untrue, doesn't make what you lived untrue. We believe you and it happened. So don't be dissuaded. We do a lot of public speaking because, again, part of this is about education of the public and prevention. But most of our work around engaging men and boys comes from the fact that a lot of us have sons and brothers and, male friends, and trying to engage them in a conversation trying to educate them so that they can then go and educate their peers is a critical part of our work. Because I know there are conversations that I can have with my son and with my nephews and with my brothers that I can't have with my son's friends and my brother's friends and my nephew's friends. But my son can have and my brother can have, right? So a lot of our work is in talking to our immediate circle of men and getting them to understand and getting them to feel comfortable with the notion of being allied to us, right? And getting them to feel comfortable with the idea of challenging your friend who makes a sexist, misogynistic comment and thinks it's funny. Let's work together and find strategic ways to hold everybody accountable so that it doesn't happen to anybody else, another woman. And if it does happen to another woman, her experience will be different, because I have seen too many instances where women, powerful and strong and angry, rightfully so, and determined to get justice, have been sort of blown through the system it's like a wilted leaf, right? It's just the wind, the whim of the wind is like the whim of the judicial system. So women are sort of blown through it and never quite land where they need to land. Stay focused, right? This is your truth. Don't crumble, because there are other ways to get justice. That is really the reason why this organization exists, is to reduce the sense of isolation that women feel, and to increase the knowledge. Because when you say you're not alone, people can say it and you can hear it, but you don't necessarily believe it until you actually meet other women. So the organization is led by women survivors. Our board of directors are all women survivors of some form of gendered violence. We have chapters of survivors across the province. Now I think there are 10 chapters across Ontario. And ultimately, our goal is really around, how do you eradicate this violence? How do you stop this violence from happening? So a lot of the work of the organization is around prevention. A lot of it is around research as well. As an example of the recent one we just completed, which came with funding from Women's College Hospital, was we were looking at the incidence of strangulation amongst women who, strangulation in the context of intimate partner violence. And the findings were just shocking. Absolutely, absolutely appalling in terms of the numbers of women who'd experienced the violence, the multiple times that they'd been strangled in their intimate relationships, and how little women themselves knew about the consequences of strangulation. And then leading from that, how little the health sector, the healthcare providers, how little they know. So we're working with folks from the Traumatic Brain Injury Center. And what they wanted to do was to really go and speak to service providers who are working with women survivors of intimate partner violence, to find out how much do they know about brain injury. And in order to develop the research protocol and to find out if these are the right questions to ask service providers who are working with women, they fly the protocol by us. Right, so they ask us, and we get the board involved, we get our chapter executive committees involved, and they look at the research protocol, and they, comment on, I don't think that if you ask this type of question, it's too broad. You need to be asking this particular type of question because I may have suffered traumatic brain because my ex-husband, cracked my head against the elliptical, for example, and nobody asked me this. So I think these are the types of questions you should be asking. And then for those who say, hell yes, I want to sue, I want to hold this perpetrator accountable, we say to them, well, how can we help? We're here. So part of this is that because poverty is an issue for a lot of our members, so we decided that every year we will have our Making Waves, we call it Survivors Making Waves, where we bring together anywhere between 30 or 40 women from across the province of Ontario. And we have a full day of being, where, again, it's bringing the women in different communities who may be doing work in their own communities, but don't have the provincial network and have not met other women. So, for example, last year, we had about 30 women, came from all over the province. We had food, breakfast, lunch. Everybody talked about themselves. It was just such a beautiful day. We cried together, we laughed together. And women, again, left saying, we need to do this more often. And we're so glad that an organization like this exists, with a space like this where you can come and be yourself, and on top, as well as being yourself, strategize, because it's not just about warm, fuzzy, let's sit down and talk. We need to find a way to actually end the violence. One of our colleagues talks about uprooting shit, right? I have a right to advocate for a change in the system. And in my advocacy, I need to be respected as the expert, because I bloody well am.
What kind of advice do you have for perpetrators? Or people thinking about perpetrating? What kind of advice and what kind of discussions do you think men should be having about this?
Yeah.
Because obviously these men exist. There's some man out there right now thinking about it.
Oh, yeah. And I guess the primary message to them is that I've been silent, I've been silenced but I won't be anymore. So I'm going to talk about what happened to me. I'm going to encourage other women to disclose who are not going to be silent about the violence. I think I have a lifetime membership to the Outraged Women's Club. We are not the bloody problem. And women are coming forward, regardless of whether they formally report to the police, as I spoke about before, or they're not. They're now talking about it. Women are becoming quite radicalized to the idea of naming these individuals. So your name is coming up in conversation. Some of it is historical. So somebody did this to me, 5 years ago. Women are now willing to come and say, it was John whatever who did it. So men who may have been complacent that the women that they rape are not going to say anything. You're complacent. You need to check it because women are coming forward. We see you. And we are going to make sure that you are accountable for what you've done, because you shouldn't do this and get away with it. So men should not be complacent to think that they can do this and be shielded because women are too intimidated, we're too afraid. The fear and the intimidation is dissipating. And we're gaining strength and courage from disclosing. So don't think that you can do it and she's going to hide away in some corner, crawl away and die. No, we're not.
Well, you're right. We are so not. Well, thank you, Nneka. I really appreciate you talking with us. And if you'd like to find more about the work that Women at the Center is doing, you can go to www.womenatthecenter.com, and that's center spelled the Canadian way, CENTRE. And you can also find the link in our show notes. And again, you can find all the details on streaming Slut or Nut, the Diary of a Rape Trial, on organizing a screening, or ordering a DVD on our website at www.slutornut.ca. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Slut or Nut the Movie. And please subscribe to our YouTube channel where these podcasts will also be posted. Thank you for listening.